Well, one other thing I want to talk to you about in this segment is Last Dance.
Yeah, well, that's a different. I mean, yeah, you're not into sports like at all.
I used to be.
Okay, so let me ask you. So, are you a big Jordan 90s basketball, 80s, 90s basketball fan?
Yeah, 80s and 90s was when I liked basketball.
Yeah, me too. And it was so. The Last Dance is a great documentary. Evidently, in the last year of the second three-peat. So there's two three-peats, right? Mm-hmm. He retired, played baseball, and came back. He had asked or somehow got permission for some sort of documentary team to follow them around all season and examine the team. And Phil Jackson began that season as The Last Dance. And the documentary opens, and I've only watched a couple episodes, and I've heard a lot of commentary, and it's blown up into a big deal. And it's been very interesting to examine not only the legacy of Michael Jordan and his work ethic and his desire to win. It's brought a lot of exposure to other players that have kind of been forgotten about. And it also highlights what I think most of us grew up and enjoyed about basketball, where we don't like basketball now, in that it was a very fundamental, skill-driven, physical game, whereas now it's a much more finesse, shooting-driven, fast Showtime kind of game. Yeah. And we've kind of lost a lot of that appeal. So The Last Dance brought a lot of that to light. What I thought was interesting to discuss is people were bored during the outbreak anyway. And when you're bored, you were going through your house, you're cleaning things out. So there's already a little bit of a boom that was happening in some sports cards and different collectible things. And I kind of do a little bit of that with my pop show as I talk about that from time to time. Mm-hmm. And it created a boom of Michael Jordan fans. And people would go out after these special cards that were basically certified to be perfect. Which, when you're rewinding a card from the 80s, finding a perfect one is like a needle in a stack of needles, right? Mm-hmm. But it didn't go up in value like a little bit. I'm talking things were going up into like tens of thousands of dollars. Mm-hmm. People were paying $500 to open a pack of cards to see if they could find this Jordan card. Well, then it was about, what about Scottie Pippen? What about Dennis Rodman? What about these famous players from that era? Now, things that were worth $10 are now $80, $100. It's like,
so a Bill Laimbeer card.
Not a popular player. Oh, okay. Not anybody has. And there are not good stories about Bill Laimbeer. The legacy of Bill. Facetious. Yeah, the legacy of Bill did not catch on. But I think that there's been a lot of that appreciation of the vintage of the 80s and 90s that there has not been much of yet. And people have been more interested in understanding, like, what Magic Johnson really played like, and what's the legacy of, from Bird and Magic into the Jordan era, and then kind of what happened, and why did the team get broken up, and what are the financial reasons. And it brought a lot of nostalgia in the sports world and created like a boom. And the trading card boom has not stopped. I thought, well, when the Last Dance ends, it'll be it. People shifted into, what about vintage baseball cards? So you're seeing a boom of other players. And they're announcing other documentaries. Like, well, if this documentary, we talk about copycats all the time, right? So if this documentary works, let's do these other documentaries. So they're going to do one on Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa, right? Remember how addictive all that was? Everybody, people, you didn't care about sports, but everybody was tuning in. Who hit a home run last night? Where are they at? So there's going to be a whole documentary on that. So what does that mean? All the Mark McGwire, they call it PSA 10 cards, Sammy Sosa cards, some Canseco cards, Clemens cards. They're skyrocketing because of this kind of stuff. So
fantastic. It's
very interesting that all this stuff's happening, and if it's not in your like niche, nobody knows it's happening. I think that's very interesting. Do you not find that interesting when you find out that there's all these different things that are sort of outside your scope?
Yeah, I mean, I would have never thought about it, that's for sure. But I do have to say that I do enjoy ESPN 30 at
30 on 30?
30 on 30 when they do the Bird versus Magic and all that stuff is fascinating.
The stories are amazing.
Yeah, it's just like, oh man, I remember those days.
Have you looked into like how much of a trash talker Larry Bird was?
Oh yeah, I watched that stuff on YouTube a lot too.
And he was literally like the most insane trash talker. Imagine going up to Xavier McDaniel, and he's like, right there on the right, I'm going to get that ball, I'm going to shoot it in your face. Yeah. And they call timeout, and he does the exact thing. And not like once. There's like 30 stories of him going in the locker room for the 3-point shootout, and like, was y'all's going to finish second place? It's like, did he take his warm-up jacket one time? The stories are just nuts. Social media wouldn't tolerate any of this nonsense now.
It's kind of funny too, because a lot of these YouTube videos, you find out a lot more years later, when you would think people like Isaiah Thomas and all these people kind of disrespected Bird. But when they talk about it years later, they're like, man, that's one of the hardest players I ever played against. But at the time, they couldn't say that.
Yeah, and, it's funny because it creates more conspiracy. As more information comes out, it creates more conspiracy. So, for instance, Isaiah was not on the Dream Team. And this comes up in The Last Dance. And the conspiracy goes that Jordan was asked to play. He said, I'm not playing if Isaiah's on the team. Because they were feuding over the way they didn't pass the baton to them when they finally won. He walked off.
I remember that.
But a lot of players didn't like Isaiah Thomas. He was kind of a very physical, difficult player to play against, and everybody kind of despised the fact that he had such a nice cherub look on his face all the time. He was always seen as the good guy when Mahorn and Laimbeer were viewed as the villains, when he was just as bad, according to them. So it's interesting that a lot of this stuff's come to light, and it is very interesting how much of this is on YouTube. In the sports circles, it was funny because they would talk about the ratings, and only 6 million people saw it. They would think this should be 10 million people. They were shocked the ratings didn't get higher and higher. They'd find out, like, I don't know, the equivalent of American Idol would have played, and it had higher ratings, and they're like, shocked, who's watching that? But to me, it was very fascinating to see how pockets of people have their interest, but they have no idea what's going on, in that circle. I just landed in this by accident. I have no idea how I even landed it. It ended up down a rabbit's hole where it just dusted off that old love. So I grew up playing basketball. I was in Indiana, so I've played since I was 4. So that was kind of my thing. I just never got big enough to really be, successful.
Competitive.
Yeah, I mean, I was good at high school at times, but nothing of any significance. I was just too small. I had no weight. But in today's game, I can't tell you last time I watched a basketball game.
I have no interest.
And I watch clips, and I'm like, they never call fouls, or they call fouls over nothing. It's just a crazy game that I just can't find entertaining. So anyway, I just thought I would talk about something different. So we ended up talking about Disney censorship and The Last Dance in the same segment. I'm like, all right, folks, well, that's what you're going to get sometime. So news talk with Brandon and Bob.
All right.